This podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Nothing stated on it, either by its hosts or any guests, is to be construed as psychological, medical, or legal advice. You're listening to Adoptees On, the podcast where adoptees discuss the adoption experience. I'm Haley Radke. I am thrilled to introduce you to today's guest, Lisa Bird Wilson, the author of the phenomenal novel, Probably Ruby. We talk about what it means to be Indigenous and adopted into a white family, and how she has now spent decades exploring her Metis identity. Lisa shares some behind-the-scenes info about the process of writing Probably Ruby, and now why she's currently writing memoir and the importance of having that history preserved for her children. You may know I have been off for a little bit, grieving the loss of our family dog, Lucy. She was with me through every interview we've aired so far on this podcast, and the one we are going to listen to together today was her last one with me. And I say that because during this interview, there are some challenges with sound, and unfortunately, I was distracted by my ailing dog. And I didn't do my best work. So I apologize to Lisa. I didn't catch some moments that I normally would have caught during our recording. And so if something cuts out or is inaudible, I am going to do my best for you to fill in those gaps. So you may hear me interjecting just a couple of times, and I'll say from the transcript, and then I will read a couple of Lisa's words that were inaudible otherwise. And that's only a couple of times, and the rest you will be able to understand on your own. We'll wrap up with some recommended resources for you. And as always, links to everything we'll be talking about today are on the website adopteeson.com. Let's listen in. I'm so pleased to welcome to Adoptees On, Lisa Bird Wilson. Welcome, Lisa.
Thank you. Hi. I'm really happy to be here.
Oh, good. Well, I'm really happy to talk to another fellow Canadian. People sometimes forget I'm Canadian, but I'm in Edmonton, Alberta. You're just one province over. Are you still in Saskatoon?
I'm in Saskatoon. Yeah, that's where I work out of Saskatoon.
All right. So Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, if you ever wondered how that word was pronounced. And I spent many summers in Saskatoon, often at the outdoor pool downtown. So yes, I very much love your city. Anyway, let's get started. Would you please share some of your personal story with us?
So I was adopted as a baby. I was a few months old. I had spent time in a foster home before being adopted, and adopted into a non-Indigenous, a white family, which I realized that the majority of adoptive parents are white parents. I always knew that I was adopted. I spent my childhood, wondering and curious and trying to sort of think about where I fit in, but it really accelerated for me in those teen years, right? Those are such hard years to start with for trying to, figure out your identity and who you are and trying on all the different identities that you do in your teen years. So, those are tough years to start with. And then add into that being Indigenous and adopted in this white family that you feel like you don't really belong, but you don't know what's quite wrong. Like, it's hard to put your finger on it. And so I did a lot of rebelling. I did a lot of acting out. And when I was 18, I badgered my adoptive mother into giving me my adoption papers so that I would be able to, because I was always just felt like I was trying to look for a clue, like what's a clue about something. So, I don't think I'm unique in the idea of sort of looking through the entire house for a piece of paper or something and like moving everything around and just trying to find things. So
from the transcript, Lisa says, I think when I was 12, I found some kind of baptism certificate, which put into question for me my date of birth. And so then I had a little crisis about that, but I didn't ever talk to my adoptive mom about this. I never said to her, tell me something, tell me more. I just kept trying to figure it out myself. So I was really, I don't know what the word is, like, I don't know if I was secretive or whatever it was, but it was mine, right? It was mine to think about. It was mine to try and figure out. And I didn't ever have the encouragement to do that. And I'm pretty sure before I realized that, I probably had an active discouragement. Then when I became more adamant and vocal and asking for things, for information, I'm asking for those papers, she also became more vocal and letting me know she wasn't really keen on that.
So I did get my adoption papers, kind of grudgingly. They were given to me and there was a name on them. And it was just a last name. And it wasn't like a Smith or Jones kind of last name. It was fairly unique. So I took myself down to the public library in Saskatoon, and right by the front door, there were like rows and rows and rows of telephone books from all across the province. And I just started at one end and I went through every phone book in the public library, one after the other, looking for this name. And eventually I found it, and I found it geographically in one, around one community, a bunch of different iterations of that particular last name. And so I made a phone call. I don't know where this came from, honestly, like to follow this through. I had a lot of nerve or something. I don't know what it was, but I made a phone call to the school in that community. So however I tracked that down, probably in the phone book, because those were the days, right? So I made a call to the school in that community, and in my head, I'm thinking about the high school I went to with a couple thousand people or whatever it was. So a large high school, a little bit sort of anonymous or however you want to look at that. And so I phone this school and I say, get the librarian on the phone, and I say, do you have like yearbooks from past years? Could I come to this school, to the library, and look at these yearbooks? Like, is this a thing? Just trying to sort of scope out, because all I really knew that I wanted was something to look at or something to see. Like, I just wanted the next clue in figuring things out. And so the librarian said, oh, who are you looking for? Like, as if we're still just having this normal conversation, right? And I said, oh, I'm looking for my mother. And I just blurted that out. Then as soon as I said it, I thought, oh, it's pretty obvious to me now that I don't have a plan beyond this. And so, oh, I'm looking for my mother. And she says, oh, who's your mother? And I said, I don't know. And so at that point, it just got weird. So I ended up telling her the only thing I knew, which was this last name. And she stops and she says, oh, she says, I know who you are. She says it like that. And I was just like, okay, what have I done? And she then said she would call me back, and we hung up, and she didn't call me back. The next call I got was from a social worker, because I had set off this, this deadly fear for my birth mother that I was going to show up at the local co-op and start asking questions. And I did not realize this was a town of maybe a couple hundred people. Like, this was a really small place. So, of course,
everybody knew everything.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah. So it just freaked her out that I was just going to sort of show up and start asking questions. So, yeah. And then things moved more quickly than I didn't even know what I wanted, right? I was just searching for these little bits and clues, and I thought that I would be satisfied. Like, when I asked for the papers with my name, I thought, okay, I'll be happy once I get that name. But then I wanted a little bit more. So I thought, okay, well, I'll do this other thing. And then, everything sort of leads to something else. Well, we ended up in a meeting. So this social worker set up a meeting to happen between us. And I was basically told, like, I was early to the party because she had thought this would happen, but not now, like not so soon, because I was still pretty young. And then he talked to me a lot about secondary rejection and put all these ideas in my head, talked to me about how he didn't think that my birth mother was going to want to come and move in with me or something. Like, all these things I had never thought about, right? Like, I hadn't thought about anything really except my need to know. And I had sort of alternately, I understood intellectually how old she was, but in my head, she was always like 15 years old. Like, she was always a teenage mom kind of thing. But of course she wasn't. She was now however old she was. So yeah, anyways, so we did have that meeting, And that just set off for me my journey of wanting to find out more things.
From the transcript, she told me my birth father's name, which was really important to me, and that he was deceased.
So then I needed to know all of those things. But I should say that we met and I had all these ideas about secondary rejection that I'd never heard about. And so I already was the kind of kid that was going to have a lot of walls up anyway. And so by the time we met, all my walls were up. Like, if nobody was going to reject me, like if anyone's going to do any rejecting, it was going to be me. Like, I was going to be in control of this, and I was going to, I was going to be the one to say. So by the time we met, I made it really clear, like, I just really want medical intervention. So I had given all these weird signals, like, I'm the one that looking, I'm the one that found you. I know I disrupted your life. And at the same time, I'm putting up all these walls. So there weren't any like hugs and kisses, and it just didn't look like that. I'm sure all of those responses, somebody psychologically can explain them, right? Like about trauma and defenses and different things like that. But that's kind of where I was then. And then over time, I've spent a lot of time, like decades, exploring my Indigenous identity, what that means to me, feeling a lot of grief and loss and coming to terms with that and sort of validating myself over time about what that means.
Thank you for sharing all of those things with us. I'm curious how writing factored in for you. Did you journal as a child? Did you only start when you were an adult? Did you use it to process things? Were you kind of recording any of these things as they were happening?
I wish I would have recorded more, because it would be kind of like gold now in terms of doing my writing. So right now I'm working on a memoir. I've written fiction. I wrote probably Ruby is an Indigenous adoptee. So just exploring a lot of things through that character. Yeah, I wish I would have written more. I did write. I always wrote as a kid. I wrote really bad poetry about people I was in love with or thought I was in love with or whatever, all those angsty things. So I don't even know where that stuff is, but it's not really relevant to this. And I probably, it's a good idea now that you say it, I could probably look back and maybe find drafts of letters that I wrote, because there was that first exchange of letters with my birth mom. I might still have those somewhere, but yeah, I didn't really, as a creative writing process, I didn't really focus on that. And even when I wrote my first book of fiction, I was and wasn't talking about being adopted and Indigenous. And I actually think I spent a lot of years in my Indigenous community not talking about being adopted, because somehow I don't know if I was embarrassed about it or what it was, but it was like something held me back from really. I also didn't want to think or believe that being adopted had impacted me probably, as much as it did. So for a long time, I resisted that, right? I resisted sort of talking about it, and I resisted thinking there was anything to be made out of it, if you know what I mean.
I find that very interesting. Yep. I think for so many people, that is absolutely true. And it doesn't kind of come up till later on. Maybe once, if you're choosing to have children or not, if you're like aging and you see your adoptive parents aging, if you still have a relationship with them, some of these like little milestone markers in our life can kind of like bring those to the surface. Am I understanding that right? Were you doing like cultural identity reclamation without looking at the adoption piece? Is that kind of what you're saying?
I guess so. Like, I early on knew that I wanted to be part of my cultures of origin, right? And so I've been connected to the Metis community for a long time. And that's really important to me, but I wasn't really thinking about it in those terms necessarily, being adopted. I did find, and I hate to say this because I don't want to be discouraging of other people, and I don't think it has to be, but there were times where I encountered people who behave in my Indigenous community who behaved as if I had something to apologize for, that I had somehow, and this isn't actually true, but as if the expectation that they had was that I had grown up with some kind of privilege. And so I would once in a while get it like that, or be treated somehow in that way, as if, I had done something wrong. Whereas, intellectually, I understand that Indigenous kids who were adopted, that's not in anybody's control, right? That's not in our control. So I think there were times where I got those messages and I just sort of shut down, and I didn't talk about my background. I didn't talk about being adopted because I didn't want to feel that level of, whether it was judgment or whatever it is. I mean, I would probably call it today, I would call it lateral violence, but I didn't know, I didn't have a name for it, and I wasn't strong enough to resist it. So I just stopped talking about it.
I'm sorry that happened to you. What I've heard from other adoptees in a similar circumstance is sometimes the family members that were either, kept, so to speak, or parented will sometimes express like, oh, you were the lucky one because you got out, not acknowledging the adoptees' loss of, so that's a whole extra layer that you're adding on there for me. That's real. I'm really sorry that happened.
Yeah. And I really don't want to paint it like it's the pervasive experience that I had, because it wasn't. I mean, the Indigenous community, by and large, people are very accepting and very welcoming. And, even more so now, there's a really even greater understanding of the need to welcome people home, right? But it's also has to be recognized that it's not that easy. And I know that, in the system that was responsible for taking Indigenous kids and Indigenous children from Canada were sent across the world, like into Denmark and into the UK and the United States. So, we're kind of everywhere. And nobody thought about the rights of those kids to their culture until very late in the game. Like, it was the mid-'80s when there's a report called the Kimmelman Report, and Kimmelman was a judge in Manitoba who talked about what was happening, talked about it as a cultural genocide, and talked about the ways that Indigenous kids were just completely severed and disconnected from their culture, and the fact that it was, for the first time recognizing in that report how important it was for Indigenous kids to know they were Indigenous and to know where they were from, and to have the opportunity or the option at some point to reconnect with their community of origin. And he says it in such a way that makes it sound like it's an easy thing to do. So at least it's being acknowledged in 1985, but it's totally not acknowledged that this is not something that is easy to do. And it's not something that's just sort of, oh, the child can choose yes or no. It's not a on or off kind of a situation. It's a lot of work, a lot of, humbling yourself to go back to the community and admit you don't know, like you don't know your culture, you don't know where you're from, you don't understand those nuances. And yet at the same time, I do believe that we carry with us our blood memory of our cultures and our languages and our lands and where we're from. And I think those positive things go with us as much as, the other things that are seen as negatives as well.
In probably Ruby, there is a section that talks about Ruby seeing too late that by having her kids, this is a quote, she'd created another generation who would miss this unknown family too. Talking about her aunties and cousins and grandparents, sister, mother. And can you talk about how you share in the book about how Ruby sort of tried to create this family system for her children, and then perhaps share a little bit about what you did or what other Indigenous adoptees who were adopted into white families have done to do some of the reclamation you're talking about?
So in the book, Ruby has a couple of boys, and she does make that realization or that connection for herself that, she has missed this so much in her life. She just felt this hollow, sort of spot. And then all of a sudden she has these kids, and she has nothing to offer them in terms of a mushum, which is a grandfather, or a kokum, or grandmother, etc. So she does this thing where she collects what she calls family pictures, and they're like prints and pieces of art that are, she picks them up at the secondhand store and she frames them, puts them on her walls, and then she creates this sort of family mythology for her kids where she'll, show them these pictures around the room, and she'll say, that's your mushum, and that's your kokum, and that's your cousin, and that's your whatever, your auntie, and different things like that, so that the kids will feel like they at least have this connection to some kind of extended family that Ruby has been missing. And so she just doesn't want her kids to feel the way that she's felt with that big gaping hole, missing hole. And I think it's often when we do have our kids that we really think about, what it is we're able to give them as a legacy and pass on to them, and, who that extended family is. And I mean, I thought about that with my kids, and it's part of the reason that I've agreed to write this memoir. I was not going to write a memoir. I was going to continue to write fiction or sort of try to take this experience and explore it through the medium of fiction. But I am working on a memoir now, and it's as much for my kids as for myself at this point, just so that when they're curious, it'll be there. I want it there for them. No matter what happens to me, I want that information to be available to them. So even in the process of writing this memoir, I mean, I have been making these connections for decades, and I'm still learning things today that I didn't know. And so it's like just continually building this narrative of yourself that's like, you layer it and you layer it and you layer it, and then you go back and you have to like pull it apart and add some more layers, because there's things that you didn't know, and there's still things. Like if I talk to a relative or I sit down and have tea with somebody, I will hear something else that I just didn't know, and it just adds that other little layer. It becomes a bit mind-boggling after a while, but I'm happy to write it down now and try to at least put it into a frame and a story.
Well, I actually have a question like on that theme that I had prepared for you, because in probably Ruby, you jump from character to character, different time periods. And at the very front, there's this web of characters that Ruby is connected to, whether it's adoptive family or friends or biological family or romantic partners or anybody that she's been in a relationship with or just knows of. And it was really interesting to me to read some of the reviews online where people like loved it, and they'll say, but I had to keep referring back to the web. Or some people were like, this was really challenging for me. Like, am I just not smart enough? And I was like, you know what? Being adopted is disorienting. Mm-hmm. And so as you were describing that, Lisa, of like collecting all these little pieces of your story and information that you're still learning, like I think the novel structure is just like this great example of what it's like to be an adopted person. Do you have more thoughts on that?
Yeah, I actually think you're exactly right. Like when I try to explain it to people and, in interviews or whatever, and they ask me about that structure, that's pretty much exactly what it is. It's that very disjointed kind of way that an adoptee comes to understand or know their story, right? So it's a little piece here, a little piece there. And also, when you refer to that relationship web that's at the start of the book, that's my son did a piece of art. So originally, I had just like a stick drawing that was keeping me organized. And then we decided that image, that web should go in the book. So my son decided he wanted to, and he's very artistic, like he's an artist. So he decided he wanted to take it and try to make a piece of art out of it that could then go into the book and make that representation. So he did it it's a multimedia sort of a collage effect, I guess. And it's got hundreds of little pieces you can't really tell from the black and white image in the book, but if you actually see the piece of art, it's got all of these layered pieces. There's pieces of yarn, there's pieces of different materials that sort of all come together to make that relationship web for Ruby. And to me, it's a metaphor for Ruby, right? Creating her world and her life out of these many, many different pieces of material and all the different the layers to it that have to come about as she builds her story.
I love that. Brilliant. Brilliant. Just like the book. Um, I think one of the things that, we've alluded to it a little bit, but one of the things that consistently comes out in adoptee stories, especially from the Canadian 60s scoop, is intergenerational trauma and really hard history of residential schools and just pain, layers of pain and trauma. And what I really appreciated was how you let Ruby be this character who is so resilient and funny and charming with this huge personality that you just kind of like, I just came to grow to love. And I don't know, I just found that so special that you didn't write this just like really hard, the trauma narrative, like the like really depressing kind of thing. It has elements of all those pieces, like the educational piece for those that don't understand the 60s scoop at all. But I love that you decided to like make her like, of course, like real. And can you tell us about her laugh and why you decided to, not just add to another like depressing trauma book into the pile of books?
Yeah, that's good. That's really great. And I'm so happy to hear you say that you were able to read it that way, because sometimes I'm not sure what happens, but some people do sort of read it as that trauma narrative. And that's absolutely not what I wanted to do. I wanted to resist that. And at the same time, so my intention with the character Ruby is to humanize this experience, right? So as Indigenous people in North America, we all share this colonial history. We share that our parents or grandparents were part of residential school history, that there's been this assimilationist policy about our people for all of these decades, 150 years, that we're all sort of been displaced from land, and we've all been a part of, treaty or land script or whatever, trying to extinguish not only our rights to land, but also, extinguish us, right? Extinguish our culture. So all of that is kind of by default part of Ruby's background. And so it is there in some of the stories from the people from her history. And some of those are stories that the reader gets to know that Ruby never knows. So the reader at the end of it knows more about Ruby than Ruby knows about herself. So just in terms of, writing Ruby, I wanted Ruby to be this contemporary human embodiment of, as an Indigenous adoptee, and all of that history is back there. And what I hope is that when a reader finishes reading, that they've got Ruby and they've connected with Ruby as a person and connected with her humanity, but at the same time, those other pieces about Indigenous history in this land are kind of there to percolate in the background and maybe spark or get thought about later on. But they're not the driver of the book, because honestly, if I were to write a fiction book where I just sort of gave a bunch of historical stuff and, my political opinion about them and everything else, well, that's not even, no one's going to read that, because that's not even fiction anymore. It's something else. So really, the character Ruby came first, and all of those other pieces, are part of her background, and they're important, but they're not. I had to deal with Ruby as a character first. And it took me a while to come to Ruby and figure out who she was and figure out that laugh that she has. And it was the laugh that she has that allowed me then to open up Ruby and figure out who she was and make her sort of fully into this fully formed character. And she takes her laugh and she uses it in all these different ways, right? Like, she thinks about her laugh as, I'll show you who I am. You know what I mean? Like, trying to sort of assert herself with people, that she's not a pushover, right? That she's just, going to laugh in the face of everything. But it's also protective for her, that she uses it as her smoke screen. And it's also genuine, right? Like, she genuinely is a character that laughs a lot and has a big laugh and enjoys life.
I've related so much to it because I'm like, I've laughed quite a few times on this show at super awkward, hard things, just because I'm like, yikes, this is hard, this is heavy. Like, and I love that piece of her for sure. So thank you for explaining a little bit more. I heard you talk about it in a couple different interviews. I really want to make sure we talked about that. Before we can wrap up, I have just a couple more questions for you. One of the questions I had is, we're both Canadian adoptees, and most of my listeners are American. So what would you want to say to American adoptees that they should know about what's happening in Canada, especially for adoptees that have Metis background or other Indigenous backgrounds? Do you have any, like, here's your book is launching in the US. It's out as this is being aired. And so it's really great that you have that platform to talk to American adoptees. What are they missing about the Canadian story?
Well, I think two things. One is, we are in a North American context. So, I think it transcends the borders of Canada, US, in the fact of North America was colonized, and Indigenous people who are Indigenous to this whole land that we call Turtle Island have sort of had those effects, right? Impact our histories and our lives. And so our colonized experience is very similar. And the experience of residential schools, they're called residential schools here. I think they were called boarding schools in the US. The adoption sort of 60s scoop, or whatever we call it here, that project of assimilation also existed across the border in the US. So our histories are, they might not be called the same kind of things in terms of the policies that were there, but those crimes were still committed regardless of that border between two countries. In Canada, there was a recognition of Métis people as being Indigenous to this land and needing, so the government saw it as, the government signed treaties with First Nations to extinguish land rights so that settlers could come in and settle on this land, and those Indigenous rights would be extinguished. Well, they understood that Métis people had land rights as well, but they understood them differently. And so Métis people had our land rights extinguished through something called land scrip, which is spelled CRIP. And so there was like a Northwest Half-Breed Commission that went across the prairies and between like 1885 and 1924 issued these land scrip certificates to Métis people. And so that's part of the Métis history that's really unique to Canada, was having these script certificates. And that's one of the major ways now as Métis people that we, I guess, prove our Métis lineage or heritage, is by having these script records and script documents within our family. So I think that there's maybe a different understanding of what Métis means across the border in the U.S. and that and even actually in Eastern Canada, there's a thought that Métis means part Indigenous and part white or European or whatever you want to call it. And that's not really true. Métis is a specific culture that grew out of the Red River, the western part of Canada, and then has had a sort of a diaspora or whatever you want to call it, throughout the West down into the northern United States and, in different places in Canada across 5 provinces is what we call the Métis homeland. So there's like a ton of Métis ideas and history there that are pretty unique to Canada and some parts of the United States, like Montana and the Dakotas.
I'm fascinated by it. I know you're the executive director of the Gabriel Dumont Institute. And so I was reading some more about it. My son, when we're recording this, he's in grade 2. So he's getting taught a lot about Métis culture right now. And so I'm trying to learn alongside him as well. So thank you. I appreciated hearing that. The last thing I want to ask you is, I feel like it's a hard circumstance where the question came out of, but I watched a couple months ago this kind of like, I would call it a violent online incident where a woman called out a fellow adoptee who identifies as Métis, and the woman did this public video saying that she's the Métis adoptee is not Indigenous because she's white passing. And so she benefits from white privilege. And so how dare she call herself Indigenous? And, she was raised in a white family, so she doesn't get to do that. It was just really horrific, racist incident. And I don't know. I watched it happen and like all the fallout. It was really wild. I don't even know what to say, Lisa. It was just really horrible. But I found it so violent because, like, how can someone else say to someone like, "Oh no, you're not Indigenous enough," and because I try and be so respectful of adoptees coming back to reclaim their heritage that was stolen from them. And you mentioned it earlier. I've heard other adoptees refer to this cultural genocide that was perpetrated by both the Canadian government and the American government, as you said. And I bring that to you to say, what would you say to another fellow adoptee who was removed from their heritage, removed from their culture, and placed in a white family? Like, some might be scared and kind of need permission to, like, you can reclaim your heritage. Could you speak to someone like that?
Yeah, I think, the situation you described is really unfortunate. And there's a lot of people with a lot of opinions. And yeah, it's just really an unfortunate kind of a situation. And sometimes I do encounter other people who are adopted and Indigenous and reclaiming. It's just such a wide, we're not all the same. There's a wide variety of experiences, of ways that people have, come to understand themselves within their context of, how they were raised and how they understand where they've come from originally. And for the most part, communities and families and people are, want to welcome you back and want to help you to validate yourself. Yeah, and there's a whole community here that's thinking about that. And the the federal government, just within the last, I can think, a few years, several years, has come to be held accountable for the removal of Indigenous kids and for the harm that it's done, and for not doing enough to make sure that that didn't happen. And so, there are ways to access some help through some of those activities that have been forced, I guess, on the federal government to try and remediate this problem. And it's not enough, but it's something. It might be a place to start.
Thank you. Well, let's do our recommended resources. And I would love to recommend your book, Probably Ruby. Your first book published from Just Pretending with short stories. And I also will mention the Red Files. If you are interested in learning a little bit more about residential schools, and the poetry is so strong and just so I was going to say lovely, but it's just like powerful, moving. I was crying a little bit when I was reading some of those poems in the Red Files. But to see you write from Just Pretending and from short stories, to see all those skills into how you structure Probably Ruby, it just comes across, it's just tremendous. I loved getting to know Ruby and all the different personality. And there is hard things in it. And it still came out hopeful in some way, realistic, hopeful, really enjoyable read. I loved reading something different out of the box from my regular reading habits. So I hope that folks pick up Probably Ruby and learn from you, Lisa. And I loved hearing a bit of your story today, because I was like, oh, not that you're Ruby, but I see how you wove a couple of pieces of you in there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So Thank you. I absolutely recommend it. And I listened to a clip of the audio version, and I think that the reader you chose really gets the vibe.
Yeah, she does.
Yeah.
But that actor, her name is Dakota Ray Hebert, and she just stuck out for me as she got the voice, she got it, the tone and everything.
Yes, I think listening would be a really great experience as well. So thank you. What did you want to recommend to us?
Okay, well, I was almost leaning into that with my last set of comments. So I think that if there are listeners who are Indigenous and adopted, they really maybe like to go and look at the 60s Scoop Foundation website. And there's a web link for that in that website. So this is coming out of that federal sort of decision to, hold the federal government accountable for Indigenous adoption and the way that it happened, and not protecting Indigenous kids. And so out of that came like a settlement, but also came this foundation. And the foundation really is interested in reclamation, right? So as Indigenous people, how we reclaim where we've come from and what we've lost. And I think it's work in progress. There's things to be done there, but there's lots of resources on that website. There's different ideas, there's groups you might be able to connect to. It kind of just gives people a way in, but it gives some other resources to work with. And I know they have like gatherings and different things of getting people together. And it always amazes me how varied and how different our experiences are from each other, while at the same time having this core of similarity, right?
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Yes, we absolutely will link to that on the show notes. Where can we connect with you online?
Well, I have a website, lisabirdwilson.com. So through there, I see, a variety of different ways to see the work that I've done and that I'm working on.
I love that you link to other short stories you've done there and other places that you're very active in the literary community. You've won a lot of awards, and you've published in a variety of places. So you've got all those things there. Thank you so much, Lisa. It's just been such an honor chatting with you and learning more about you. And congratulations on Probably Ruby. It's really a fantastic book.
Thank you so much, Marcy. I appreciate it.
So I enjoyed reading Probably Ruby so much. I think we'll likely pick it as a book club selection in 2023. So I look forward to reading that with fellow adoptees together soon. And I'm really thankful for Lisa sharing some of her story with us. And her writing is just so powerful. I think you will be encouraged by it. And I don't know, I'm just like cheering on all these adoptee authored works that are getting huge press and huge presence in the media, mainstream, so it's not just adoptees reading these books, it is a wide audience. So the more we can cheer them on with friendly reviews and positive online comments, because whenever we're expressing challenges regarding adoption, there's lots of people out there who don't understand and will be giving these authors not so nice things to say for anyone who's critical of the adoption system. So if you're able to, and if you've read Probably Ruby, make sure you go and give it 5 stars wherever you love to review books on Goodreads or Amazon. And I'd encourage you to do that for all of your well-loved adoptee authored books. They all can use more of our cheerleading out in this world. I am just feeling, once again, really grateful for everyone who has been very supportive of me taking a little time away, and my editor for her patience with me being a little bit erratic, which is very unusual. And so I thank her for her work on this episode. And, sound is so important to me, and we will absolutely keep doing better in that respect. And yeah, I'm really, I don't know, I feel like I have a full heart today. And thank you for everyone that supports the show. If you want Adoptees On to keep living and existing in this world, you can join us on Patreon, adopteeson.com/community, and find out all the bonuses you get for supporting the show. And we are almost to summer break. And so we have episodes to the end of June, and then we'll be on a summer break just for a little bit, so we can all take a pause and you can catch up with old episodes that you've missed. But we have several more great things coming up for you through the month of June. And so, yeah, I'm excited about producing all of those for you. And there's some really great stuff coming. Thanks so much for listening. Let's talk again next Friday.